Welcome to Linguistics Tube. On this channel, you will find videos about learning English, as well as more scientific videos about linguistics and psychology, and more general academic topics such as study skills, conducting research, and writing academic articles. This episode is part of my series which explores the grammar of English. We will learn about all the major types of words, phrases, and clauses, as well as other interesting grammatical phenomena. Through these episodes, you will not only learn the theory of English grammar, but also practical tips and advice about how to improve your grammatical ability in English. In this episode, we will explore adverbs. In this episode, we will discuss all the main aspects of adverbs. Let's begin with an introduction to this type of word. Adverbs are somewhat similar to adjectives, because both grammatical categories modify other grammatical categories. As I explained in the episode about adjectives, modify has a specific meaning in the context of grammar. When we say an adverb modifies other grammatical categories, we mean that adverbs add more detail to other types of words. If you already watched the previous episode, then you will know that adjectives modify nouns, or something which does the job of a noun, such as a pronoun, or a type of phrase, such as a noun phrase or a gerund phrase. Just to remind you, a gerund phrase begins with a word ending in ing and can be the subject of a clause. For example, in the clause, eating ice cream on a windy day is difficult, the gerund phrase is eating ice cream on a windy day. Anyway, back to adverbs. Whereas adjectives only modify one grammatical category, nouns, adverbs can modify 4 grammatical categories. So, my first question is, which grammatical categories do adverbs modify? Pause the video to think about this, and continue when you are ready. The most obvious or common use of adverbs is to modify verbs. This should be obvious from the name adverb, because it literally means to add something to a verb, which in this case is more detail to the meaning of the verb. Next, we learned in the episode about adjectives that adverbs also modify adjectives. They do this to show gradability, or the amount or level of the adjective, such as quite hungry or extremely hungry. Quite and extremely are both adverbs. The third grammatical category modified by adverbs is adverbs. Yes, adverbs can modify other adverbs to show the gradability of an adverb in the same way that they can for adjectives. Finally, although this may seem strange, it is possible, in a few specific situations, for adverbs to modify nouns. Throughout this episode, we will explore this in more detail. Let's now do an activity. In these 4 sentences, you need to decide 2 things. Firstly, what is the adverb? And secondly, what type of word is it modifying? Or, in other words, what word is the modifier and what word is being modified? Please pause the video while you work out the answers and continue when you are ready. And here are the answers. In the first sentence, James speaks loudly in the classroom. The word being modified is speaks, which is a verb. The modifier is loudly. In the second sentence, the word being modified is boring, which is an adjective. The modifier is quite. In the third sentence, there are actually 2 modifiers and 2 words being modified. Firstly, slowly is modifying the verb runs. However, I am more interested in the modifier very, which is modifying the adverb slowly. Finally, in the fourth sentence, the sinking of the Titanic was such a disaster, the word being modified is a disaster, which is actually a noun phrase. The modifier is such, which is definitely an adverb. Overall, from this activity, you can see that adverbs can modify verbs, adjectives, other adverbs, as well as nouns in specific situations. We will learn more about these in this episode. Let's now move to the second section of this video, in which we'll discuss the form of adverbs. Let's begin by repeating something that we discussed in detail in the Adjectives episode: the form and the function of a word. These are two tests, or two ways, to identify the grammatical category of a word. The form of a word refers to the structure of that word. This has two aspects. Firstly, we can use form to identify the grammatical category of a word by looking at the physical shape of only that word. Secondly, we can use form to identify the grammatical category of a word by looking at the bigger picture, which is how and where the word is used in the sentence. The second test to identify the grammatical category of a word is to examine its function within the sentence. The function of a word refers to the word's meaning. When learning about grammatical categories in detail, it is necessary to fully understand both their form and function in order to have a well-rounded understanding of that word type. Watch the episode about adjectives again if you need to remind yourself about form and function. We learned in the Adjectives episode that it is fairly easy to identify that a word is an adjective. We can look at its form and its function in the sentence to determine that. Specifically, the vast majority of adjectives can be attributive, predicative, or postpositive. They can be comparative, and they can be gradable. Also, if it adds more detail about the property of a noun, then it is an adjective. Unfortunately, it is much more difficult to identify that a word is an adverb. This is because many words are classed as adverbs, but they look completely different from each other. For example, today looks very different from beautifully, which looks very different from so. This is due to the fact that many words are categorized as adverbs simply because they don't belong to any other grammatical category. In other words, many adverbs don't appear to modify verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs, but they have been classed as adverbs for the reason that they are not another grammatical category. Therefore, while the category of adverb contains mostly words which modify verbs, adjectives, other adverbs, and very occasionally nouns, there are also several adverbs which are called adverbs, simply because linguists do not know what other type of word they are. Because of this, you can think of these adverbs as leftover words. So examples of leftover words are yes, no, please, not. In this section of the episode, we will focus on the form of adverbs. One of the key aspects of the shape of a word is whether a word can be identified as a member of a grammatical category by whether an ending has been added to a word from another grammatical category. The more technical word for endings is inflections. The other three main grammatical categories, nouns, verbs, and adjectives, have many inflections that we can use to identify them. However, as I just said, it is much more difficult to identify adverbs, and a major reason is that there are very few inflections that can identify adverbs. To demonstrate this, I will now show you all the major inflections for the 4 main grammatical categories, along with some example words. For each inflection, I would like you to think of another word with that inflection. Firstly is the inflection idge, such as village. Next, ul, arrival. Uns, reliance. Dumb, boredom. Employee. Driver. Hood, brotherhood. Ism, capitalism. Ist, socialist. Itty, brutality. Munt, amazement. Nus, happiness. Entry. Ship, friendship. Shun, population. Please pause the video to think of another noun with these inflections. Next, for verbs. 8. Complicate. Soften. Ify, identify. Eyes, economize. Please pause the video to think of other verbs with these inflections. It is important to note that, while it is true that there are few verb inflections, in fact, many verbs have these inflections, and the verbs that do are common verbs. Therefore, we can say that many verbs have inflections. Next, for adjectives, firstly is the inflection able. For example, drinkable. Please pause the video to think of another adjective with this inflection. Next, ul, brutal. Golden. Ease, Vietnamese. Full, helpful. Yemeni. Ick, classic. Ish, Spanish. Iv, active. Ian, Canadian. Lus, hopeless. Lee, yearly. Us, cautious. Windy. And here are the 3 inflections that create adverbs from other types of words. Woods, afterwards. Ways, always. Wise, likewise. From this, we can conclude 3 things. Firstly, it's clear that adverbs have very few inflections. Secondly, most of these example words are not frequently used. And finally, very few adverbs have these inflections. So, in conclusion, we cannot rely on inflections to identify adverbs. Perhaps some of you, when you saw the previous page, thought that I had forgotten to include the inflection ly. In fact, when I was at school, my English teacher taught us that adverbs end in ly. At first, this seems to be correct, because we can think of many common adverbs ending in ly. For example, beautifully, carefully, hopefully, historically, easily, busily, luckily, angrily. For example, he spoke angrily to the student. So, for a long time, I assumed that all adverbs end in ly, and that if a word ends in ly, it must be an adverb. Like I said, this is what my English teacher told us. However, if we think more carefully, this rule doesn't seem to be true. So, my question to you is, do you think this is a reliable method to identify adverbs? And why? Try to think of at least one reason. Pause the video until you can answer the question. The claim that all adverbs end in ly is not a reliable method to identify adverbs. There are two reasons for this. Firstly, there are many adverbs which do not end in ly. For example, after, before, never, soon, today, abroad, here, upstairs, quite. For example, I want to travel abroad. And the second problem with this method is that many words which are not adverbs do end in ly. For example, costly, daily, deadly, friendly, kingly, lively, likely, lonely, lovely, ugly, weakly. For example, the plant is very deadly. These words are all adjectives. So remember that while it is true that many adverbs end in ly, it is still not a reliable method to identify this grammatical category. Let's now talk about the relationship between adjectives and adverbs. Regarding the form of ly adverbs, they are made by adding ly to adjectives. For example, beautiful is an adjective and beautifully is an adverb. Ly adjectives, by the way, are made by adding ly to nouns. For example, weak is the noun and weakly is the adjective. Anyway, back to ly adverbs. For almost all of these adverbs, there is a direct connection between them and the adjectives. So we know that angrily comes from angry and happily comes from happy. However, for a small number of ly adverbs, there is not a direct connection between the adjective and the adverb, because some ly adverbs have completely different meanings from the adjectives that they appear to have come from. Here are some examples of this. Firstly, the adverb lately does not come from the adjective late, because they have completely different meanings. Another example is the adverb hardly, which does not come from the adjective hard. To further demonstrate this, here are these examples in sentences. It should be obvious that they have completely different meanings. Firstly, I will have a late class tonight. I haven't been feeling well lately. Another word for lately is recent, so it sounds fine to say, I haven't been feeling well recently. But you certainly cannot say, I will have a recent class tonight. Here is a second example. This rock is hard. I hardly know him. Another word for hardly is barely, so it sounds fine to say, I barely know him. But if you say, this rock is bare, the meaning of the sentence completely changes. So, overall, you can see that the situation of ly adverbs is more complicated than we first thought. Continuing our discussion about the relationship between adverbs and adjectives, some adverbs actually have the same form as adjectives. In other words, some adverbs and adjectives look exactly the same. Sometimes both types of word have the same meaning, and sometimes their meanings are completely different. For example, late, early, fast, straight, dead, left, hard, outside, right, well, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. Here are a few of these words in sentences. The adjective is first, and the adverb is second. Firstly, we had a late meeting. We arrived late. Remember that, while you can create an adverb by adding ly to the adjective late, lately has a completely different meaning. Secondly, he is dead. It's dead easy. Here, the adverb means very, so the adverb and the adjective have completely different meanings, even though their form is the same. In this sentence, we cannot use the adverb deadly. Thirdly, rocks are hard. You have to bang the door hard to shut it. Here, the adverb means with great force, so it does not exactly have the same meaning as the adjective. Remember that hardly has a different meaning. Finally, they are fast swimmers. They can swim quite fast now. In this case, both the adverb and adjective have the same meaning. So, it is important to learn the meaning of each word and not assume that two identical words have identical meanings. To conclude our discussion about the relationship between adjectives and adverbs, let's talk about the similarities and differences between the comparative nature of adjectives and adverbs. If an adverb has the same form and the same meaning as the adjective, an adverb can use the inflectional comparison er and est for comparatives and superlatives. Let's return to the previous example, late, to demonstrate this. We can say, we had a late meeting. We arrived late. So the adverb and adjective have the same form and the same meaning. As a side note, remember that the adverb lately has a completely different meaning from the adverb late. Because late is both the adjective and the adverb, we can say, her later years were not happy, and he arrived later than expected. On the other hand, if the adverb has a different form from the adjective, then the adverb must use the phrasal comparison more and most. For example, my dad is a politer man than me. Humans should talk to their pets more politely. Because the adverb and adjective have the same form, specifically polite is the adjective and politely is the adverb, we must say more politely. So, it is ungrammatical to say humans should talk to their pets politer, because polite is the adjective and politely is the adverb. Let's do an activity to check our ability to identify adverbs. In these 7 sentences, please find all the adverbs. In sentence 3, there are 2 adverbs to find. Pause the video to complete this activity. And here are the answers. In sentence 1, the adverb modifies the verb arrived, because it gives more detail on the timing of their arrival. In sentence 2, the adverb modifies the verb likes, because it gives more detail on how much the speaker's mother likes her. In sentence 3, which contains 2 adverbs, both not and quite modified the adjective ready, by adding more detail on the amount of readiness. In sentence 4, the adverb modifies the verb looking because it gives more detail on how much the speaker was looking. In sentence 5, the adverb modifies the verb put because it gives more detail on how to put your hands. In sentence 6, the adverb modifies the verb realized because it gives more detail on when the speaker realized. And in sentence 7, the adverb modifies the verb put because it gives more detail on where to put the money. In the next section, we will discuss the main types of adverbs. We can put adverbs into groups based on either their form or their function. Firstly, we will discuss the types of adverbs based on the form of the adverb. We will now look at the three main groups of adverbs. These groups are based on the adverb's form. In other words, the form of the adverbs is the criterion that was used to put the adverbs into these three groups. Therefore, the adverbs have been categorized based on what they look like, not what they do. We'll begin with simple adverbs. These are the shortest adverbs, so they are usually only 1 or 2 syllables. Importantly, they are always single words, so they have not been made by adding 2 words together. Here are some common examples. Well, only, down, rather, quite, today, near, far, there, back, close, now, then, never, next. Pause the video to think of some more simple adverbs. The second type of adverb, based on form, is called compound adverbs. These are made by combining 2 smaller words into one adverb. The principle is the same as compound nouns, which you might have heard of before. These are nouns which are made from 2 smaller words, such as hot dog, sunflower, and swimming pool. Compound adverbs are admittedly less frequent words, but there are still many of them. For example, somehow, somewhere, somewhat, nowhere. Here is an example in a sentence. We'll finish our homework somehow. The third type is called derivational adverbs. These are made by adding inflections, which are special endings, to an existing word. The vast majority of derivational adverbs are made by adding ly to adjectives, such as quick, quickly, abrupt, abruptly. However, the 3 inflections that we saw earlier are also derivational adverbs. They are woulds, for example, afterwards, ways, for example, always, and wise, for example, clockwise. Compound and derivational adverbs are similar because they are both created by adding 2 things together. However, the important difference is that compound adverbs are made by joining together 2 full words, whereas derivational adverbs are made by combining an existing word with an inflection. Here is your next activity. I would like you to answer these 3 questions. Firstly, if an adjective ends in L, what do we add to make the adverb? Secondly, if an adjective ends in Y, what do we change the Y into to make the adverb? And finally, if an adjective ends in E, do we keep or remove the E to make the adverb? In addition to your answer, please think of at least 1 adjective and adverb for each question. Pause the video now. Here are the answers. To make an adverb from an adjective that ends in L, we add ly. There are many examples, and here are just a few. Beautiful, beautifully. Careful, carefully. Hopeful, hopefully. Historical, historically. Secondly, if an adjective ends in Y, we change the Y into I and then add ly to make the adverb. For example, easy, easily. Busy, busily. Lucky, luckily. Angry, angrily. For the third question, if an adjective ends in E, do we keep or remove the E to make the adverb? The answer is that sometimes we keep the E, and sometimes we remove it. Some examples of keeping it include definite, definitely, fortunate, fortunately, extreme, extremely, absolute, absolutely. And some examples of removing it include simple, simply, true, truly, gentle, gently, possible, possibly, considerable, considerably, terrible, terribly. Before we move on, I would like to briefly talk about some adverbs that you might hear on TV shows or in movies, or if you go to London or New York. In non-standard English, some adjectives are used as adverbs. Non-standard English is a form of English that is technically ungrammatical, but some native speakers use it in informal situations, like chatting with friends. Those same native speakers would certainly not use it when talking to their boss, for example. Let's look at some examples. Firstly, in the sentence, "That's real cool," real is used as an adverb because it modifies the adjective cool, but its form is an adjective. It is equivalent to the standard English sentence, "That's really cool." In this case, real and really are both adverbs with the same meaning. Secondly, in the sentence, "He's doing fine," the adjective fine is used as an adverb. In standard English, this sentence means he is well. Interestingly, you cannot say he's doing finely, so there is no equivalent sentence in standard English. Next, we clean forgot means we completely forgot. In this case, clean and cleanly are not equivalent, because you cannot say we cleanly forgot. Next, in the sentence, "Take it easy," easy is not equivalent to the standard English adverb easily, even though usually easy and easily have the same meaning. This is because you cannot say "take it easily." In standard English, the sentence "take it easy" means calm down. Here is a final example. In the sentence, "They guessed right," it sounds strange to say "they guessed rightly," even though right and rightly are equivalent to correct and correctly. Therefore, you can say "they guessed correctly," but not "they guessed rightly." This shows that non-standard English doesn't follow regular patterns of English, and so each sentence must be understood on its own. In the next section, we will discuss the function of adverbs. We'll begin with a quick recap of the function of grammatical categories. Remember that form and function are the two ways to analyze and identify the grammatical category of a word. We have discussed form so far in this lesson. To determine the grammatical category of a word, we can firstly analyze what the word looks like. This includes the shape of the word itself, and also its position in relation to other words in a clause. For example, in the sentence, "He angrily spoke to the student," we know that the adverb is angrily, firstly because it has ly, which makes it likely to be an adverb, and secondly because it appears next to the word that it modifies. When considering the function of a grammatical category, we are interested in the purpose of that grammatical category. Therefore, for a member of that grammatical category, this is much more related to the meaning that the word adds to another word and to the entire sentence. In this section, we will discuss the main functions of adverbs. Afterwards, we will have a complete picture of the nature of adverbs. I must firstly say that, in this section, we actually won't discuss the most obvious function of adverbs, which is to modify verbs. Because this is undoubtedly the most important and widespread function, we will discuss how adverbs modify verbs in a separate section of this episode. Before that, in this section, we will talk about the other important functions of adverbs, which is how adverbs modify other grammatical categories. Firstly, adverbs can pre-modify adjectives. We have discussed so far that adverbs can modify adjectives, but pre-modify is a new concept. Pre is a common inflection, which can be added to many words. Can you guess the meaning of pre from this sentence? My life pre-COVID-19 was very happy. Yes, pre means before. So if an adverb pre-modifies an adjective, it means that the adverb is before the adjective. The only situation in which adverbs pre-modify adjectives is to show the level or amount of the adjective. These are called degree adverbs. We discussed these in detail in the episode about adjectives. Here are a few examples. Very happy, completely excited, entirely confused, utterly exhausted. The opposite of pre-modify is post-modify. Here is this inflection in a sentence. My life post-COVID-19 will be happy again. Therefore, we can see that post means after. We say that adverbs only pre-modify adjectives because it sounds very strange or even ungrammatical to say, I am excited completely, or he was confused entirely. Before we continue, do you remember that the type of adjective which pre-modifies a noun is called an attributive adjective? Well, the reason there is not a name for the type of adverb which pre-modifies is because, in general, there is more freedom and flexibility and fewer limitations on the position of adverbs. So, in several situations, it sounds fine to put the adverb in different places in the sentence. This contrasts adjectives, which have very strict rules on their position. Anyway, let's continue with degree adverbs. We just learned that degree adverbs show the amount or level of the adjective. There are adverbs to describe a small amount, adverbs to describe the largest amount, and adverbs to describe everything in between. Because of this, we can put the degree adverbs into 4 groups. We'll start with the largest amount first. Maximizers, as the name suggests, convey approximately 100% of the adjective. For example, completely excited, totally crazy, utterly bored. In these phrases, it isn't possible to be more powerful because these show that the level of the adjective is at its highest. The next level is called intensifiers. Very approximately, these adverbs convey 80 to 90% of the adjective. In other words, these adverbs show that the meaning of the adjective is around 80 to 90%. Some examples include highly exciting, terribly silly, really interesting, very happy, virtually non-existent. You may not have previously seen virtually in this context, but it is definitely an intensifier here. It's certainly possible to express a slightly higher amount than these words, which demonstrates that these only express 80 to 90%, not 100% of the meaning of the adjective. I must emphasize that these percentages are very, very approximate. The next group is called approximators. approximators convey roughly 70 to 80% of the level of the adjective. The two most common are almost and nearly. For example, almost full, nearly complete. And finally, the adverbs which convey the smallest amount of the adjective are called downtoners. These words express approximately 30 to 40% of the adjective. Here are some examples. Fairly boring, quite tired, hardly interesting, slightly crazy. Before we continue, to be clear, language cannot be adequately explained with mathematics. So these percentages of the level of the adverbs are very approximate. Instead, please use these approximate percentages to help you to understand the nature of the levels, because it is better to think of the 4 levels as broad categories. For example, the job of downtoners is to reduce or shrink the level of the adjective. So, even though the adverb hardly means almost none, it still fits this definition, even if it might be slightly lower than 30%. So, don't put too much emphasis on those percentages. Being a broad category, hardly is probably at the bottom end, whereas fairly and quite are at the top end. But they still perform the function of downtoners. Although I don't recommend this in your writing, I do recommend that, if you want to sound more native, then you can use this and that as intensifiers. This is very common in spoken, informal English. Usually, these words are demonstrative determiners, which are a type of adjective, so using them as degree adverbs is technically ungrammatical. This is why you should limit their use to colloquial contexts only. Here are some examples. If you are in the middle of an English grammar lesson, you might say, "I've never been this bored before in my life." Next, if you invite someone to go to a museum with you, he or she might say, "I don't want to go to the museum. I'm not that interested in history." Next, here is a conversation about future plans. "I really want to be an interpreter in the future." "Really? You're not that good at interpreting." In these sentences, this and that are increasing the adjective. So, that can be replaced with other intensifiers. For example, "I'm not that interested in history" is synonymous with "I'm not very interested in history." And in the final example, which is the colloquial sentence, "I'm not that crazy about oatmeal," we can rephrase it into standard English as "I don't like oatmeal very much." There are some complications regarding degree adverbs, because for a few of them, the same word can be more than one level. To demonstrate this, I'll use just one example. Quite. The most common meaning by far is a downtoner, such as "I quite like opera." But it can be used as an intensifier, such as "This food is quite delicious." There is, of course, no grammatical method to tell the difference between them. So, instead, we must examine the language and the style of the text to make an educated guess. Regarding the language, we can rely on context, which is the overall meaning or topic of the sentence, the feelings or emotions of the speaker, and the adjective that it is used with. For example, less intense adjectives like good, cold, happy are probably downtoners, and more intense adjectives like amazing, perfect are probably intensifiers. We can also examine the style of the text. Quite, as an intensifier, such as I quite agree, is mostly used in British English, not American English, and it is also mostly used in older texts and used by older speakers. So, if you are watching Downton Abbey and they say, I'm quite happy to wait for you here, it is most likely an intensifier, because they speak British English and the TV series is set over 100 years ago. After using these methods, if you are still unsure about the speaker's meaning, then ask the speaker to clarify his or her meaning. Returning to our discussion about the functions of adverbs, remember that the first function is that they can pre-modify adjectives. The second function of adverbs is that they can pre-modify other adverbs. This doesn't require much explanation because degree adverbs are used to modify other adverbs, so the process is identical to the first function. For example, very carefully, pretty badly, extremely slowly, quite clearly, too quickly. The third function of adverbs, which is undoubtedly the least common, is to pre-modify noun phrases. Most of the time, these noun phrases contain or express a quantity or an amount of something. However, noun phrases which don't express a quantity can also be modified by adverbs. These are again degree adverbs, so the process is identical to the two previous functions. Here are a few examples of both quantity and non-quantity noun phrases. Almost all of us, about 1,000 people, over 300 students, approximately half of you, nearly every country, rather a lot. And finally, quite a shock, such a disaster, especially me. You can see in the last example that the adverb is modifying a pronoun, which is a type of noun phrase. At this point, it is finally time to explore the most obvious, important, and common function of adverbs. But firstly, let's summarize what we just learned. Adverbs can modify adjectives, other adverbs, and noun phrases, including pronouns. For example, he's very happy. He arrived very quickly. Only now did he speak. They won't like it, especially her. Crucially, we call the modifier an adverb if it modifies these grammatical categories. However, crucially, if an adverb modifies a verb, we do not call it an adverb. Instead, we call it an adverbial. An example of an adverbial modifying a verb is we walked slowly. The reason why this modifier is called an adverb will become clear in the next section. We'll explore adverbials in detail in this section. Let's start with a definition. An adverbial is a word or phrase that modifies the verb. In other words, several grammatical categories can be an adverbial if they add more detail to the meaning of a verb. There are, in fact, 5 types of adverbial, and an adverb is only one of the ways to modify a verb. Because of this, an adverb is called an adverbial when it modifies a verb, because it is one of the several ways to modify a verb. In other words, adverbial is a category, and this category includes other ways to modify a verb in addition to adverbs. This is why we do not say that one of the functions of an adverb is to modify a verb, because this particular function is part of the function of a bigger category, the adverbial. I just said that there are 5 types of adverbial. Let's now look at them. First is the most obvious type. Adverbs can modify verbs. Here are just a few of the many adverbs that we've already learned about. Soon, quickly, completely, somehow. For example, in the sentence, I will arrive soon, soon gives us more detail about when the speaker will arrive. The second type of adverbial is noun phrases. For example, in the sentence, I get paid every week, the noun phrase every week gives us more detail about how often the speaker gets paid. The third type is prepositional phrases, such as I saw her on Friday and he's waiting in the office. You can learn about prepositional phrases in another episode in this series. Basically, they are a preposition plus a noun phrase. So, Friday and the office are noun phrases, and on and in are prepositions. Together, they become a prepositional phrase. They again give us more detail about where and when something happens. The fourth and fifth types of adverbial are both types of subordinate clause. I won't explain them in detail in this episode, so feel free to pause the video now and answer the 2 questions on the screen, if you do not already know the answers. Firstly, what is a subordinate clause? Secondly, what is a finite and non-finite subordinate clause? Firstly, a subordinate clause is a clause which cannot exist on its own as a separate sentence, and instead must be joined to another clause, the main clause in the sentence. Therefore, a subordinate clause is dependent on a main clause. A subordinate clause on its own as a separate sentence is ungrammatical. There are 2 types of subordinate clause: finite and non-finite. A finite subordinate clause has a verb that is either past tense or present tense. Because of this, we know when the event in the subordinate clause happened. For example, in the sentence, I'll ring you when I get home, the verb get is present tense. And in I sent flowers because it was her birthday, the verb was is past tense. In contrast, a non-finite subordinate clause does not show the time when something happened. There are 3 types. Firstly, a clause whose verb is the infinitive form of the verb. Infinitive verbs begin with the word to. For example, he rang to tell us the news. The second type is a clause whose verb is a present participle. This is a verb which ends with ing. For example, I broke my leg when skiing. This is non-finite because we don't know when the speaker was skiing. And finally, the verb can be a past participle. For example, the student says he wants to become a teacher when asked what job he wants to do. This sentence does not show the time that the student was asked this question. Regarding the position of adverbials within a sentence, they can be at the beginning, the middle, or the end. Sometimes they are separated from the rest of the sentence by a comma, especially if they are not directly next to the verb. For example, on Friday, I went to a movie. I still can't believe it. We could see them through the open window. Different languages often prefer to put adverbials in different positions. In English, adverbials are most common at the end of sentences. But in Chinese, for example, they must always be before the verb. For example, compare the position of a preposition phrase adverbial in English and Chinese. I went to the park at the weekend. 我周末去了公园, which literally means I weekend went park. It is ungrammatical to put the adverbial at the end of the sentence in Chinese, like it often is in English. In terms of the movement of adverbials, it is very common for adverbials at the beginning and end of sentences to swap their positions. In other words, an adverbial at the beginning of the sentence can easily be at the end, such as, on Friday, I went to a movie, and I went to a movie on Friday. However, it is less common for middle adverbials to move. It is not technically ungrammatical for middle adverbials to appear at the beginning and end of sentences, but it does sound less natural. For example, I still can't believe it sounds better than still, I can't believe it, and I can't believe it still. Let's do an activity to check your understanding of adverbials. Here are 5 sentences. What type of adverbial is in each sentence? Please pause the video while you do this. 1. James answered in English. 2. I suggest meeting her for a coffee. 3. James answered this morning. 4. James answered immediately. 5. The teacher ignores Janice if she interrupts him. And here are the answers. The adverbial in the first sentence is a prepositional phrase. We know it is an adverbial because it adds more detail about what he used to answer. In the second sentence, it is a non-finite subordinate clause. We know this because it adds more detail about what the speaker suggests. In the third sentence, the adverbial is a noun phrase. We know this because it adds more detail about when he answered. The adverbial in the fourth sentence is an adverb. We know it is an adverbial because it adds more detail about how he answered. And finally, in the fifth sentence, it is a finite subordinate clause. We know this because it adds more detail about why the teacher ignores her. In the final section, we will discuss the main types of adverb, which have been classified based on their function. We've already discussed the form and the function of adverbs, as well as the main types of adverb based on their form. Now, in terms of their function, we will discuss the types of adverb. The first type of adverb that we'll discuss is the most common type of adverb, central adverbs. There are actually 4 subtypes of central adverb: time adverbs, manner adverbs, place adverbs, and frequency adverbs. In other words, these 4 types of adverb are all members of the same category, central adverbs. For example, here are 4 sentences with central adverbs. Pause the video and decide what type each adverb is. In the sentence, she'll arrive soon, the adverb is a time adverb because it gives us more detail about when she will arrive. In I quickly left the room, the adverb is manner because it tells us how the speaker left the room. In he lives nearby, the adverb is place because it tells us more detail about where he lives. And finally, in it seldom rains here, the adverb is frequency, because it tells us how often it rains. If you see a sentence with a central verb, but you are not sure what subtype it is, then turn the sentence into a question without the central verb. The central verb will be the answer to the question, and the word which you used to create the question will tell you what type of central adverb it is. Let's do an activity to practice this. There are 4 sentences in total, 2 on this screen and 2 on the next. For each sentence, create a question. The answer to the question is the adverb, and the question word will tell us the type of central adverb. Firstly, my friend left yesterday. Secondly, my friend ate her breakfast slowly. Pause the video while you complete the activity. Then, I will show you the answers. For the first sentence, the question is, when did my friend leave? The adverb is yesterday. The question word is when. Therefore, this is a time adverb. For the second sentence, the question is, how did your friend eat her breakfast? The adverb is slowly. The question word is how. Therefore, this is a manner adverb. Here are the third and fourth sentences. Thirdly, my friend put the boxes there. Fourthly, my friend visits me occasionally. Please pause the video now. For the third sentence, the question is, where did my friend put the boxes? The adverb is there. The question word is where. Therefore, this is a place adverb. For the fourth sentence, the question is, how often does my friend visit me? The adverb is occasionally. The question word is how often. Therefore, this is a frequency adverb. The second type of adverb in terms of function is modal adverbs. If you have watched the episode about verbs, then modal adverbs might be familiar to you, as it sounds a lot like modal verbs. There are 9 modal verbs in English. Please pause the video and remind yourself of them all. The main modal verbs are can, could, may, might, must, shall, should, will, would. Also, some linguists say that ought to and had better are modal verbs, but others disagree. So, to compromise, these 2 are called semi-modal verbs. They are synonymous with should. We use modal verbs to show whether we believe that something is certain, possible, or impossible. So, modal verbs show whether something is certain, possible, or impossible. There are also adverbs which have this function, and so they are called modal adverbs. Some common modal adverbs are certainly, definitely, probably, possibly. These have similar meanings to the verbs, so we can easily create 2 synonymous sentences, one with a modal verb and another with a modal adverb. For example, it must be hot outside. It is definitely hot outside. The first is a verb, whereas the second is an adverb, but their meanings are identical. Next, I might come. Maybe I will come. And finally, that may be a problem. That is possibly a problem. In the sentence, maybe I will come, will is not a modal verb, it is a future tense word. So, you could also say, maybe I am going to come, because the two ways to create future tense in English are will and be going to. Also, in the sentence, that may be a problem, remember that may be and maybe are completely different. So, may is the modal verb in this sentence. The third type of adverb, in terms of function, is comment adverbs. As the name suggests, the purpose of these adverbs is to comment on the overall meaning of the sentence. If they are at the start of a sentence, they are often separated by a comma. Using this type of adverb cleverly allows the speaker to indirectly show his or her opinion about the information in the sentence. In other words, the speaker is able to insert his or her own opinion into the sentence without mentioning himself or herself. Let's look at some examples. In these sentences, the underlined words are the comment adverbs, and in the sentences in parentheses, the underlined phrases are what the speaker really means. Therefore, luckily, he had another pen with him really means, I think it was lucky that he had another pen with him. Or, I think he was lucky to have another pen with him. Here's another example. They stupidly forgot it really means, I think it was stupid that they forgot it. Or, I think they were stupid to forget it. And finally, honestly, it's disgusting really means, to be honest, I think it is disgusting. Hiding your opinion makes the sentence more formal and indirect, so you can more easily say what you really think without causing confrontation. There are some common phrases which function as comment adverbs. For example, personally speaking, curiously enough. Here are two example sentences. Personally speaking, I love to study English grammar. Curiously enough, when I got there, everyone had left. I have two tasks for you. Firstly, what do these comment adverbs mean? Secondly, can you rephrase the sentences to show what the speaker really means? I recommend that you use the examples on the previous screen in parentheses to help you, because those sentences show what the speaker really means. Please pause the video to complete these tasks. Personally speaking means that I am sharing only my opinion, not the opinion of others. Curiously enough means strangely. Therefore, in these two sentences, the speaker really means, in my opinion, I love to study English grammar, and I think it is strange that when I got there, everyone had left. The final type of adverb to discuss is the linking adverb, which again, as the name suggests, links or joins sentences. Specifically, linking adverbs show what kind of relationship exists between the sentence they are in and the previous sentence. There are three ways to link or join sentences. The first way is to use a linking adverb to express a contrast between the meaning of two sentences. To do this, we can use the adverbs however, though, nevertheless. For example, if you were postgraduate students, I would talk to you about adverbs for 6 hours. However, because you are freshmen, 80 minutes is enough. The contrast is between postgraduate students and freshmen, and also between 6 hours and 80 minutes. The second way to use a linking adverb is to express the effect or consequence of the second sentence on the first sentence. We use the adverbs therefore, thus, as a result to show this. For example, you are freshman students. Therefore, I will only talk about adverbs for 80 minutes. In other words, the consequence of being freshman students is that I will only talk about adverbs for 80 minutes. Finally, linking adverbs can show how the meaning of the second sentence adds to the meaning of the first sentence. To show addition, we can use the adverbs in addition, also, furthermore, moreover. Here are two examples. Today, we talked about adjectives. Moreover, we also discussed adverbs. In addition to adjectives, today we will talk about adverbs. The first example explains that the second activity we did today builds upon the first activity. The second example is a little different because it is within the same sentence, but the function is the same. One reason that it is so important to distinguish between form and function is that many adverbs look exactly the same, but their roles in the sentence are different. In other words, many adverbs are the same type in terms of their form, but are different in terms of their function. So, how do we distinguish between them? Or, how do we know which function an adverb is if there are multiple functions of adverbs with the same form? The simple answer is that you need to understand the meaning of the sentence and the role of the adverb within the sentence. This can be quite difficult, so let's look at some situations in which the same adverb can have two functions. The first situation we'll look at is when an adverb can be both comment and central. Remember that all comment adverbs are made by adding ly to adjectives. Also, some manner adverbs such as easily, some frequency adverbs such as occasionally, and some time adverbs such as immediately, which are all subtypes of central adverbs, are made in the same way. Therefore, both comment adverbs and some central adverbs are both derivational adverbs. Comment and central describe their function, and derivational describes their form. So, how do we know which function a derivational adverb is? Put simply, you need to understand the meaning of the sentence and the job of the adverb within it. Therefore, if the adverb refers to an opinion, then it is a comment adverb. If it adds more information about the manner, time, or frequency of the verb, then it is a central adverb. By the way, as far as I know, no place adverbs are derivational, but if you can think of some, then please let me know. Let's look at some examples. Firstly, here is a comment adverb. Happily, she smiled at him. We know this is a comment adverb because it shows that the speaker is happy to see that she smiled. To phrase it more directly, we could say, I am happy to see that she smiled at him. However, happily can also be a central adverb in the sentence, she smiled at him happily. This shows that she smiled in a happy way, so it gives us more detail about how she smiled at him. Therefore, it is a manner adverb. Next, it is possible for some adverbs to be both linking and central. One example is the adverb then. In terms of form, it is a simple adverb. but in terms of function, it can be both a linking adverb and a time adverb. Here are two very similar examples. It is a conversation between two friends who are arranging to have dinner together. In the first conversation, then is a linking adverb. Do you want to eat dinner together tonight? Yes, I'm free after 6 p.m. Great, then I'll meet you. In A's answer, then means therefore, or in that case. So it shows the effect of the time that B is free on A's decision of when to meet. In contrast, here is the same conversation with then as a central adverb, specifically a time adverb. Do you want to eat dinner together tonight? Yes, I'm free after 6 p.m. Great, I'll meet you then. In this case, then means at that time or at that moment. As you can see, I changed the position of then to make it easier to understand. However, it is perfectly possible to say, great, I'll meet you then, as a linking adverb, and great, then I'll meet you as a time adverb. Usually, linking adverbs are at the start of the sentence and time adverbs are at the end. However, if they are in the same position, then you must rely on the meaning and the context of the sentence even more. Finally, derivational adverbs can also be degree adverbs in addition to central adverbs. For example, she writes awfully or she writes perfectly are manner adverbs because they mean her writing is awful or her writing is perfect, or the way she writes is awful or the way she writes is perfect. However, these words can also be degree adverbs in sentences like, it's awfully cold today, I must wear a coat, and this lunch is perfectly horrible, I won't eat at this restaurant again. Remember that there are 4 levels of degree adverb. In the first sentence, awfully is an intensifier because it means very cold. Therefore, awfully awful means very horrible, but no one would ever say that. In the second sentence, perfectly is a maximizer because it means completely horrible. You may have never heard this use of awfully or perfectly before, because these words as degree adverbs are not very common in today's English. You will certainly hear these words as degree adverbs in TV series like Downton Abbey. You might think it is especially strange to say perfectly horrible, because perfectly usually has a very positive meaning, like this lunch is perfectly delicious. Nevertheless, it makes sense that perfectly is synonymous with completely, because perfect and complete both mean the most of something. Perfect is the biggest quality, complete is the biggest quantity. So, if you want to speak in a more classic way, you can use awfully and perfectly as degree adverbs. Remember that awfully is an intensifier and perfectly is a maximizer. Despite my assertion that awfully and perfectly as degree adverbs are very uncommon in contemporary English, they are still sometimes used, such as in the Taylor Swift song, The Way I Loved You. Here are 3 lyrics from the song. I will only say them, not sing them, so feel free to listen to the song yourself to confirm. He opens up my door, and I get into his car, and he says you look beautiful tonight, and I feel perfectly fine. The reason there is a question mark in the title on this screen is that some people think that degree adverbs and modal adverbs have the same purpose, so they are somehow the same type of adverb. But that is not true. Although we didn't discuss them in this section of the episode, degree adverbs are a type of adverb based on their function, and degree adverbs are a separate type of adverb from modal adverbs. Their forms are different. By this, I don't mean the words themselves, but how they interact with other words is different. Specifically, degree adverbs modify adjectives and adverbs, whereas modal adverbs almost always modify verbs. Also, while I can see similarities between the meanings of some degree and modal adverbs, such as I am very happy and I am definitely happy, their functions are different. The degree adverb in this sentence, I am very happy, explains that I feel a high amount of happy. But the modal adverb in the sentence, I am definitely happy, shows the likelihood that I am happy, which in this case means it is certain that I am happy. To finish this episode, we will do some activities to practice what we just learned. In our first activity, we will use the adverb hopefully. It has two common uses. It can be a comment adverb, so if the speaker uses hopefully as a comment adverb, it means I hope that. For example, hopefully he will pass all his exams means I hope that he will pass all his exams. Secondly, it can be a manner adverb, which means that something is done in a hopeful way, or with hope. For example, he opened the envelope which contained his exam results hopefully, means that the way he opened the envelope was done in a hopeful way, because he hopes that he has excellent exam results. On the next screen are 5 sentences. You need to decide which type of hopefully has been used. One. They pressed their noses hopefully against the shop window. 2. We will hopefully do well. 3. The train won't be late, he said hopefully. 4. Hopefully, I can take the chance with both hands. 5. These seats will hopefully be more comfortable. Please pause the video now to complete this activity. Okay, let's look at the answers. The manner adverbs are in sentences 1, they pressed their noses hopefully against the shop window, and 3, the train won't be late, he said hopefully. Because the pressing and saying are done in a hopeful way. In contrast, sentences 2, we will hopefully do well, 4, hopefully I can take the chance with both hands, and 5, these seats will hopefully be more comfortable, are comment adverbs, because they show the speaker's opinion. You can easily rephrase the sentences to show the speaker's opinion more directly. I said earlier that comment adverbs are often at the start of a sentence, and a comma may separate them, like in sentence 4. However, this doesn't always happen, like in sentences 2 and 5. So you cannot rely on this method alone to determine the type of adverb. Instead, you can use this as an additional way to confirm the type of adverb. In our next activity, you will see sentences with 2 different meanings of however. This time, I won't tell you the meanings, so your task is to work them out by looking at the sentences. Firstly, find synonyms, which are words with the same meaning. Secondly, use the synonyms to explain the two meanings of however. One. However strange you find it, do not be distracted. 2. You must deal with the pain, however terrible. 3. He bought the bag because he loved its colour. However, he is skeptical about its practical value. 4. John decided to turn his home into a gym. There was no room in the house for exercise, however. Please pause the video now to complete this activity. Okay, let's look at the answers. I hope you noticed that the first two have completely different meanings from the second two sentences. Specifically, 1 and 2 are degree adverbs because they modify the adjectives afterwards. In terms of a definition, however here means it does not matter how, or no matter how. If you say these instead of however in the first two sentences, the meaning of the sentences becomes clearer. Regarding sentences 3 and 4, they are linking adverbs. Specifically, they are contrast linking adverbs because they contrast the idea in the second sentence with the one in the first sentence. Look again at the two sentences to see exactly what has been contrasted. Here is our final activity. What type of adverb is each use of so in these four sentences? 1. This doesn't seem so bad. 2. It's softer than it was before, so I am happy. 3. I'm not so young as I used to be. 4. I'm so not going to that party. Please pause the video now to complete this activity. Okay, let's look at the answers. Sentences 1, this doesn't seem so bad, and 3, I'm not so young as I used to be, are degree adverbs. In sentence 1, you can use very instead of so, and the meaning doesn't change. Sentence 3 is slightly more complicated because so young as is a syntactic structure. To use very instead, we need to rephrase the sentence to I am not very young anymore, which has a very similar meaning to I'm not so young as I used to be. Sentence 2, it's softer than it was before, so I'm happy, is a linking adverb. Specifically an effect linking adverb, because it explains that the consequences of it being softer is that I am happy. Finally, sentence 4, I'm so not going to that party, is a modal adverb, because it means I am definitely not going to that party. This is the end of the episode about adverbs. If you liked what you heard, then you can find more episodes in my English grammar series, as well as other series on the topics of English and linguistics. Thank you for watching.